Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Got a couple of 380s on the table. I've got the Walther CCP M2 and the Sauer P365 380. Please don't forget to check out our website. Go to our affiliates page. You'll find discount codes for things like Mantis Axe and Core belts. Link to that cool little bore light that we use for lighting up the barrels. Use those links. It will often save you money, never will cost you any additional money, and helps the channel. And please consider supporting the channel on Player, formerly Utreon, where we can do some types of videos that are no longer allowed on YouTube. These are both 380 versions of guns that really kind of started out with the line being 9mm. So starting with the P365, it's just a smaller version of the P365 9mm, which you see here. And you can see it's a little bit smaller. Now this one has the Armory Craft grip module on the Sauer P365. And that's one nice thing about the P365. Similar to the P320, the chassis is the serialized component. You can swap out grip modules. This one happens to be an XL. They do have a smaller version of it. So what this gives you is a slightly smaller, slightly lighter 380 version of a gun that you're used to. It's got all the same features as a P365. It's optics ready. It has the SIG light night sights, which you can see easily during the day, but they also will glow at night, so you've got kind of the best of both worlds. And Walther CCP is a little bit bigger. It's similar in a pattern to this PPS as far as you can see, the pattern that they followed starting with the original PPQ. Now that they've moved into the PDP realm, the pattern is changing, but the CCP is kind of based on that original pattern. This is the M2 version. Solves a couple of really annoying problems with the original one. And of course this one's in 380 and the original one was 9mm. So why are we even looking at 380? Why do people buy 380? Well, there's a few reasons you would look at 380. One reason you would look at 380 is to get the absolute smallest, tiniest thing you can get in a competent caliber. Neither of these is that. Things like the Ruger LCP series, that's your ultra tiny thing in a competent caliber. Those tend to be unpleasant to shoot and difficult to shoot well. The recoil is significant. And you might think, yeah, 380, it doesn't have any recoil at all. You'd be surprised. This is a 380. It's heavy. You would think that this would have no recoil at all. It's a Walther PPK-S. This thing is really unpleasant to shoot. In 32 ACP, this is a pleasure to shoot. There's another variant of this. But in 380, this is miserable. It beats your hands up. So just because it's 380 doesn't mean it's not going to have any recoil. So when you look at these two, there's a big difference in size. You can see the P365 is significantly smaller. It's 5.8 front to back versus 6.41, so it's almost 3/4 of an inch, not quite. From a grip height, it's 4.2 versus 5.12, so you can see it's a whole thumb grip height difference. Thickness is similar. The P365 is 1 inch and 1.18 inch for the CCP. So the CCP is a significantly larger gun overall. The CCP weighs 19.4 ounces and the SIG weighs 15.7. But that's where you start to get into where these have some advantages. They are light. Now the SIG is relatively easy to rack. You know, I can kind of grab it and I can easily rack it almost completely. If I turn my hand around, I can rack it with just a finger off the sight. And I'm working at it a little bit, but I can do it. The CCP, light rack. That's one of the really things about this. And you can see I can rack it all day, whichever finger I use, even my little finger. So if you've got weaker hands, if you've got things going on with your hands, this gives you significantly less recoil and a very easy slide. The next step up is this gives you really good recoil. It's moderate recoil. It's more than the CCP, and a relatively light slide. It's not heavy like a 9mm. It's not super light. But the big advantage of why would you go with something a little bit larger like the CCP in 380 is that ultra-light slide. From a safety perspective, both of these have the internal drop safety piston. That's where they're similar, and that's where they digress. This also has a thumb safety. And I hate these, but it has a magazine disconnect. If you don't have the magazine in it, you have a dead trigger. Some people like those. I don't. Magazine disconnects to me serve no real purpose. All it would take during a legitimate issue is to have that magazine pop just a little loose and you get a dead gun. They have both designed to be drop safe, and the thumb safety is an additional safety that if you're somebody that likes a thumb safety. They both have front and rear serrations. As you can see, the slides are easy to get, and the serrations are good enough for pretty much anybody to rack the slides. They both have rails. The difference is this is a SIG rail on the P365, which is not quite a Picatinny rail. You see there's no notch. So it requires devices that are optimized for that SIG rail. This is a standard Picatinny 3-slot rail, so anything that'll fit on a PIC rail will fit on these. Neither of these have replaceable back straps or any of those cool features that are coming out, now. Optics ready on the P365, which as much as I like putting optics on guns, I do think that a defense gun with an optic does have a place. When you're starting to get into these super small things like you might use as an ankle gun or a pocket gun and stuff like that, that might be the line where putting an optic on it, that additional bulk and height, might be something that you may not do. But if you don't put an optic on it, you got SIG light sights. If you don't like the SIG light sights, you want an optic, you put an optic on it. You have the choice. The P365 line, all of them are optics ready in the 380s. They have a state compliant version of this because capacity is one of the things where they're different. And this could be significant. 8 rounds in the CCP. With an optional, nothing. It's 8 rounds in the CCP. There are no extended magazines for it. This has been out long enough that if Walther was going to produce an extended magazine for it, they probably would have already done it by now. So you're limited to 8 rounds in what's a decently sized gun. P365, 10 rounds in the flush mag. And you saw how much shorter this was, and it's still thinner. Or the optional mag that has kind of an extension on it is 12 rounds. And this makes it kind of a 3-finger grip. And of course, the CCP being a longer grip is a 3-finger grip. So when you start looking at it, what's going to be the deciding factor? Well, this is a SIG. They're going to be expensive, right? Not really. SIG doesn't publish MSRPs, but I'm seeing these consistently in around the 550 territory. So I'll say that the MSRP is roughly 550 on this with an optics-ready capability and extended capacity. Comes with 2 of the 10-round magazines that you see here. The CCP, the MSRP is 500. So price, they're very similar to each other. That's not going to make the decision. Capacity could make the decision, but one of the things that you would look at the CCP for is that super soft recoil. One of the differences between these two is the P365 works very conventionally. It has a heavier recoil spring to manage the recoil. This thing works a little bit different. Up under here, there's a piston. And I don't know if I rack the slide back. Now, you can't see it even if I rack the slide back. I'd have to take it apart. But there's a gas piston in here, and there's a gas port. This is not necessarily a gas operated because the gas doesn't generate the recoil. It delays the recoil. So instead of having a really heavy spring and a really heavy slide to manage the recoil of the power of the cartridge, it uses that gas system that as long as the bullet's in the barrel, there's gas pressure against that piston. It's basically holding the slide closed. It's blocking it from cycling. As soon as the bullet leaves, pressure drops, it can then cycle. So it doesn't need a heavy slide and it doesn't need a heavy recoil spring. That gas also kind of locks the slide and mitigates that initial recoil that would come from the firing of the cartridge. The result is super soft recoil. It's like shooting a .22, and as you saw, super light slide. So if you've got compromised hands, but you still have the strength to operate something like a P365 reliably, I would go with this. You're smaller, lighter, better capacity overall. But if your hands have moved to the next level and operating even the P365 380 is difficult, the CCP is going to kick in. And then the other consideration too, especially if you've got degraded hand strength, is the grip. There's a little more to get a hold of here on the CCP versus this. It's just kind of thinner. You see how my fingers wrap completely around. In fact, my thumbs are opposite of each other, so it kind of dwarfs in my hand. And the CCP, they kind of line up. So it's a fingernail difference in the grip, and it's a little bit more to get a hold of, which again, if you have compromised hand strength, that can make a difference. Both of these have proven to be reliable. They both work. One of the things about this, the P365, you lock it back, pull down the arm, take it apart. It comes apart like everything else. The original CCP disassembly was a total kludge. They had this tool, and you had to reach in here and push in a piston and hold it, and it almost took 4 hands to get the thing apart. They've drastically improved this one. So what it is it's now totally toolless. So the first thing you have to do, of course, is clear it. And then you have to insert a magazine to drop the hammer. Once you've done that, you simply push in on this and then push over on this little lever, and this pops out. And that initiates the disassembly process. At this point, you pull this further back, pull the spring out, and then just lift the slide off. So you can now disassemble and reassemble the CCP relatively easily. Now, normally during comparisons, I don't take them apart, but I'm going to take this one apart, and just for one reason. I want to show you that piston system. So that's that piston I was talking about right there. And it hangs down off the front of the slide. And if I can get the camera to focus, there's a little port in there. Hang on a second. There it goes. See that port? The piston goes into that port. And unlike a gas-operated piston gun like an AK-47 or something like that, where the piston is used to actually cycle the action, as I mentioned previously, this piston is used to delay the cycling of the action. Now, putting it back together is not difficult, but at the same time, it's kind of a kludge because you have to get this piston lined up. So I'm just going to stop the video. There's 2 things you have to do. You have to line the piston up, and you have to make sure that the recoil spring doesn't block the opening in the slide. And it's a little kludgy, but once you get used to it, it's easy to do. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to put it back together so I can continue. So I almost completely finished the reassembly. I got the piston lined up. I got the slide back on. The only thing left to do to finish it is to push this back into place. The little blocker slides back over, and the gun is again back reassembled and operational. I would say that for the design that they've got with that piston system, this is probably the best that could be done with a takedown on it, and eliminated that ridiculous little tool that was either easy to lose, and even if you had the tool, difficult to use. It was kind of clunky to use. This is actually doable. So you just a couple times practicing with it, and even lining that piston and spring up, it was easy for me to do it. It just would have been difficult showing it on camera because I would have had to turn it to face me. So that was kind of really the big difference there. So overall, as I mentioned previously, these are both reliable. They both have a purpose to serve. If you've got compromised hand strength, recoil issues, and things like that, the CCP with unfortunately just 8 rounds is going to kind of bubble to the top. And the P365 is kind of the middle ground. There is, of course, one other factor that would influence the decision, and that's the trigger. So we'll start with the P365. Notice no magazine. Minimal take-up. I'm on a wall. Kind of a little bit of creep through the wall, but not much. A very light trigger and a nice break. This is a striker gun. Nice defined reset. You really feel it. You really hear it. You're right on the wall. And then again, just a hair of a creep through it, but overall a very nice trigger, right in around the 5.5 pound territory. So the P365 380 has a very nice trigger. So now let's look at the trigger on the CCP. I'm going to put the magazine in it because of the disconnect. No real take-up. So you're right there. No real take-up. But very long, creepy, kind of stuttery wall. And then a break at the very back. And it's about a 5.5 pound trigger, but you notice it stuttered as I was pulling it back. It kind of hung a little bit. It wasn't difficult by any stretch. Now, of course, demonstrating the reset is more difficult on this one because the magazine has to be in it to pull the trigger. So there I am at the back. I kept it all the way at the back. Reset is all the way out. I did not really feel it, and I barely heard it. If I were in a noisy environment, I wouldn't have heard it. Again, I'm right back on the wall, and then you have, of course, that same very creepy, kind of a little bit stuttery break. The trigger on this is decent. When I'm sitting here at the table, I can show all of its warts. Most of that disappeared in live fire. It was relatively easy to shoot well, and the sights are decent, albeit a little bit small, but they're decent and fairly easy to see, with enough of a gap between the front and rear that you can easily find some target to get as a reference point. But if you want to talk about which one's got the better trigger, absolutely definitively the SIG has a better trigger. And with those SIG Light night sights, makes it a lot easier to use the sights whether it's day or night. So overall, if you can handle and shoot something like the P365, this is going to be the better choice than the CCP. Better capacity, smaller, lighter, thinner, and nicer trigger. If this is a little too much, as far as recoil and everything else, move to the CCP. You're going to get a reliable gun that is going to serve you well, but for a 380, it's a relatively large chassis, and everything's just bigger. Typically with 380, unless you're solving a problem like I've described, you're generally doing it to go smaller. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell up there to be notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Player, Rumble. We're pretty much everywhere. And thank you.